no sense of moderation. You guys, we just crossed 2,000 subscribers on this channel. I am mind blown that you're all enjoying the content this much, and thank you so much for all the love and support that you've shown all of my videos so far. I am so grateful that you're enjoying it as much as I am. So as a thank you and a little love present from me to you, today we're going to jump into a very popular series on this channel, Style Study. And as a bit of indulgence for myself, today I wanted to look at one of my top 10 favorite artists over the last couple of years or so, Karmen Loh, also known by her Instagram name BEARBRICKJIA. If you know why you're here, skip to part 1, timestamps are in the description, as well as you'll find chapter markers on the seek bar below. But if you're new here, hi, welcome. I promise you're going to fall in love with this series and binge watch it, guaranteed. Style studies are where we look at some of our favorite contemporary artists and look at their style, analyze it, see what we can learn from it. And I mention this every single time, but the key word here is learn. I am not encouraging you to copy someone's work or plagiarize or any of that cool stuff. The whole point of this series is so you can learn a new trick or two and see how it works with your own style. I want you to take away some new tips and tricks from this series and apply it to your own work, alright? So the way that I structure these is usually in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll look at some of Karmen's work and analyze it, see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of Karmen's original paintings. The reference I chose today was this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to a brand new painting of our own. And I'm going to warn you now, it's a little bit spooky vibes. So whenever you're ready, give this video a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe and or join button down below for more exclusive art videos. But for now, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring BEARBRICKJIA. Karmen Loh is a digital illustrator based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In a bunch of interviews I found online, she's mentioned how she started drawing around the age of 15 and went to college around 2013, where she studied 3D animation. However, she fell more in love with creating illustrations and currently works as a freelance illustrator and character concept artist. She has worked in the entertainment industry, namely Streamline Studios, and on projects such as Street Fighter V and Steel Circus, and her recent commissions with the Mr. Sheep channel are honestly some of the most beautiful paintings that I've ever seen. She primarily paints female or feminine characters, and her art is legit the kind of stuff that you would dream about. I mean, look at it, it's stunning. Understandably, this gorgeous art has garnered her around 428,000 followers on Instagram alone, and despite only really posting 2 videos on YouTube about a year ago, her channel has over 6,700 subscribers. And sadly, you guys, I have officially run out of list jokes to make. Nah, I'm just kidding, I'll never run out of these. I've been able to break down Karmen's art into 5 main attributes, but even that was such a tough job because there is just so much magic that she weaves into these paintings. And when I see work like Karmen's, it makes me think of fantasy skies and beautiful stars on earth. In fact, you could almost say that Karmen's art is surrealist. Alright, let's dive in. Karmen's art is incredibly unique because it beautifully toes the line between fantasy and realism. No, really, you can literally see a clear boundary in her work where realism ends and fantasy begins. You see, before anything else, Karmen thinks of a clear storyline. No matter how simple or complex a piece is, whether you have a singular character or a group, whatever the composition may be, her first priority is always to tell a story. In an interview with Girls Club Asia in the December of last year, Karmen mentioned that art helps her tell stories that she can't express using words. And this to me is the biggest key to why her art is so successful and wildly popular. Her art literally speaks 1,000 words that most of us couldn't string together in a sentence. Although there isn't necessarily a single consistent sequential storyline or theme across her portfolio, every single painting tells a detailed story. Be it through the main character, the setting, the color palette, or my favorite one of them all, the solid contrast to reality, Karmen doesn't paint characters as much as she paints stories. But coming back to that boundary between realism and fantasy, in a lot of her work you can tell exactly where one ends and the other begins. Why? Because she doesn't necessarily play with the individual elements in her painting so much as she plays with the context of them. Here, for instance, you see a giant whale painted exactly the way whales would look in reality, but oh, there's just one little detail. It is in the sky. The locational context of this whale is what takes this from a regular oceanic illustration to a fever dream, essentially. Similarly, here you have these cool clouds and trees and maybe mountains. Oh, nope, it's a girl. Cool moon among the clouds and the stars? Ahaha, nope, it's a crazy titan holding all of it in her hands. So you see, while she does use actual realistic elements that you would find in nature and the world around you, Karmen plays around with the context in such dramatic ways it completely throws you off kilter. And then it makes you disappointed that the world isn't already like that. Why, Karmen? Why? In a similar vein as the storylines, when it comes to character proportions, Karmen once again plays with the subtle boundaries of realism. She's mentioned how a lot of her work has always been inspired by Japanese manga and the works of Studio Ghibli. And you can see this influence in the facial proportions of her characters if you know what you're looking for. So you'll see that the eyes are just a little bit larger and rounder than would be realistic, and the nose is just a teeny weeny bit smaller and more upturned than the average human nose would be. The lips tend to be full and glossy, but not super big. The jaws are soft and the chins are narrow, but again, not overtly so. The skin is soft and smooth and always has a healthy amount of color, but not too much. And it almost always has this lit from within glow, which we'll look at in just a second. But when it comes to proportions, it is that super subtle exaggeration and minimization of features that still keep a realistic element to the characters' faces, but at the same time make them just a touch more aesthetically pleasing. Basically, Karmen's characters are what most Instagram models wish they looked like, and honestly, I don't even blame them. These girls are gorgeous. Although she generally only paints bust shots, which is essentially just the head, neck and shoulders, in paintings where you do see the entire character, their bodies are fairly average, as are their clothes. Nothing too modest nor too explicit, because again, the focus is always on the story. So you see, once again, Karmen plays with the realistic proportions and facial features in such a subtle way that you can't call it realistic, but you can't quite call it completely stylized either. Over the next couple of points, I want to talk to you about the rhythm of a piece. If you watch my more recent style studies, you know that I have lately been obsessed with finding rhythm and movement in the compositions that I study, because I'm a nerd like that, and nothing gets me quite as excited as finding the abstract subtleties in a painting. The rhythm of a painting is basically what drives your eye to move across it. A lot of artists use rhythm in their compositions without even consciously realizing it, but when you know what you're doing, the rhythm in your painting can almost tell your story on its own. And the first crucial part of rhythm is the flow. In Karmen's work, she uses very crucial elements of flow to guide your eyes across the painting. You'll see long fluid lines in the hair that create this graceful movement in an otherwise still painting. It's almost as if there is a subtle breeze that is causing the character's hair to blow around, but they are unfazed by this. This is also something that we saw in the Gouet style study, and I think it really adds a lot of strength to the piece. But you'll also see flow in a bunch of the other elements that you would generally write off as being stationary. Flow doesn't just come from movement, it also lies in the long curves and leading lines all across the painting. So you'll see the soft contours of the clouds, the dynamic arrangement of stars and glitter, the wispiness in the lashes and brows, and the leaves and flower petals blowing in the breeze. In fact, I think this painting that she did for Mr. Shape has the best example of contrast between flow and stagnation. Sure, obviously the hair has two separate bits, one is still and the other is moving, but also notice the little specks of light. On the still side, they lie scattered and flat and you don't really see much of a pattern. But on the wavy side, you'll notice that the clusters of these stars or floaty specks lie in diagonals. It's so subtle, but your subconscious mind always looks for patterns, and this difference in how the specks are arranged gives you a clear idea of the flow in the image without even having to look at the hair. I told you guys, Karmen is a pro at manipulating the context of an element. In this case, the arrangement of the same exact floating specks of light. Don't even look at me right now. I'm fangirling so hard, it's embarrassing. The second most crucial element of rhythm in a composition is the positioning of visually noisy and quiet areas. As I'm sure you know by now if you've watched any of the other style studies, the more smaller detailed elements there are in an area, the noisier it gets visually. And vice versa, the more you have smooth, flat planes in a part of a painting, the quieter it is visually. And as we've all heard time and time again, good composition is all about balance between the loud and quiet areas in a painting. But here's an interesting pattern I noticed in Karmen's art that I like to call the helix. If you take this painting, for instance, and divide it into 3 horizontal sections and look for the visually noisy versus the visually quiet areas, you'll notice a pattern. In the upper third, you see that the center of the composition is noisier while the sides are quiet. In the middle third, however, this is flipped. You now have a relatively quieter area in the center because the skin has softer blending, while the noisier parts of the hair and the leaves and flowers have been pushed further out. But then you go further down into the bottom third and this is flipped around again, so that the noisy bits are again in the center while the outer edges are quiet and flat once more. And if we say, for instance, that the noisy areas are black and the quiet areas are white, when we put the painting together, we see this almost helix shape formed by the black and white areas. In this painting called Gleam, you see this, but with vertical thirds. On the left third, the noisy elements are at the top and bottom of the piece, while the middle bits are quiet. In the middle third, however, you have all of the noise from the flowers and the specks of light really concentrated in the middle of the piece, while the upper and lower bits are flatter and more softly blended. And in the right third, it flips again, where the petals, specks of light and hair split towards the upper and lower edges of the painting, and the center is once again quiet. Here you have a horizontal helix of black and white. And obviously this is a very simplistic understanding of her compositional choices, but I think it is a really interesting feature in Karmen's work that really shows you how she uses rhythm to create this almost beat in the painting. This to me is the most powerful part of her work. And finally, the one characteristic that you'll find across all of Karmen's illustrations is the presence of A, specular highlights, and B, floating specks of light and stars. Obviously, since her characters are stylized to have these almost perfect features, the skin is flawless and smooth. So when Karmen adds a bit of specular highlight to the nose, it only serves to push the glass skin effect that is pretty much always trending in the beauty community. It causes the skin to look plump and squeaky clean and youthful, almost like a baby's face would look. And of course, you have your usual suspects for specular highlights, that is the eyes and the lips, where adding little lines and spots of bright white help to push the glossy wetness of them. And if you've watched my video about painting life into eyes, you know that adding a specular highlight instantly makes the eyes look so real and alive. It's almost a cheat when you're painting characters because of how effective it is. But with the skin, I mentioned earlier that it has a lit from within look. We went over this in detail in the Shell E Cell study, which I've linked up in the cards, but essentially you have a layer of bright, high contrast, saturated colors that lies underneath a translucent flat layer of highlight. It's painted in such a way that the saturated tones peek through the skin, but the translucent airbrushed layer on top eliminates any texture that might be caused by these dramatic colors underneath. And finally, when it comes to the storyline, Karmen does very often have this cosmic, ethereal effect that she throws into her art. So you'll almost always see little specks of bright white or any other super bright color simply floating in the sky. But you'll also see some of these specks in the character's hair, which again adds to that element of flow. It's like the same breeze that's blowing the character's hair is also blowing away these little flecks of light along with it. In some cases, you'll see these little specks of white in almost the same area as you normally see freckles on the skin. I think this is a super smart move that is more than simply just adding aesthetic value. You see, because the skin is blended so softly, adding the little freckles can help to break up what can be a very monotonous zone in the painting. However, actual freckles that are brown and caused by sun damage would break that ethereal perfect feel to these characters. So a great middle ground is to substitute freckles with these little flecks of light instead. It still adds those smaller elements to the composition to break up that monotony, but at the same time it maintains that surreal feeling, because let's face it, no human being is ever gonna have freckles that glow white. Such a subtle move, but so clever. So to sum up part 1 of this study, here are the 5 key characteristics to Karmen Loh's art. Number 1, her art toes the line between fantasy and realism by taking everyday elements you'd find in the world around you and completely switching up that context in such a way that the scene is incredibly surreal, almost like something you would dream of. 2, Karmen's characters have very subtly stylized proportions where the eyes are just a little larger, the nose, mouth and jaw are just a little softer and minimized, and the skin is absolutely smooth but still has color in it. Again, taking reality and bending it just enough that it feels ethereal. Number 3, she uses elements of flow to gently guide your eye around the painting, be it through obvious elements like the hair or through more subtle details like the placement of certain smaller details. 4, the positioning of visually noisy and quiet bits creates this almost helix-shaped composition, which again serves to guide your eye around the painting in very specific sequential ways without literally creating leading lines or obvious signposts. And number 5, Karmen sprinkles a bunch of specular highlights on and around the character in order to break up large monotonous spaces and give the characters a youthful, glowy, otherworldly appearance. For the study portion of this video, here's the reference that I've chosen. It's called Beyond the Clouds, and although it's way more complex than the references I usually study on this series, I just couldn't resist trying this one out. I mean, look at it, it's absolutely stunning. The first and biggest challenge that I faced with this one was getting the colors right in the skin. Obviously, because I keep my references on a second screen, there is a bit of discrepancy in the colors initially, and this is why you see me bring the reference back onto the screen towards the end. But the challenge here was the low contrast. Because the skin is so softly blended, it was actually quite difficult to discern the right values and saturation, because to the naked eye, it literally all just looks like a soft orange gradient. And as someone who doesn't work too well with subtlety or moderation, this was quite the task. The second challenge was definitely the hair. I'm not used to painting so much detail in hair, particularly so many PC hard-edged strands, but like I've said several times on this channel before, if you find that you can't do something, it is simply an opportunity, an invitation to expand your skill set, so take that opportunity and spend the time learning how to do it. So you'll definitely see me go back and forth with the hair, painting over to get rid of certain sections, then painting those sections back in. It was definitely a process, but I can tell you that I now understand hair and flow a lot better. And towards the end, I had to make a lot of color corrections. First, I had to bump up the magentas quite a bit, though that is entirely due to the difference in picture quality across my screens. But the second, I had to really lower the contrast and do it in a bunch of different ways by playing with the brightness and contrast sliders, but also the levels menu and the hue saturation menu. But in either case, here's the final painting I ended up with, and honestly, I'm super proud of it. For today's original painting, we're diving back into the Dark Astrology series. Why? Because this one scares the living daylights out of me and I've absolutely been putting it off. Yes, Dad, you were right. Don't even give me that look that I know you're giving me right now. But I absolutely wanted to play with Karmen's style in a slightly darker scenario just to see what it would end up looking like. So while you watch me paint, let's talk a little bit about Scorpio. Scorpio is a fixed water sign and it is heavily associated with death and transformation, the whole phoenix rising from the ashes vibe. Its ruling planets are Pluto and Mars, and I don't know why, but that Plutonic energy to me is the most attractive thing in the world because it has this dark, mysterious, abstract element that is often associated with the idea of the cosmic womb. I always joke that Scorpio's light side is most other signs' dark side because Scorpio's light attributes are all about spiritual awakening, being super intense and mysterious, secrecy and charisma, and power-hungry ambition. So when this is their light side, should Scorpio go dark side, you better run. Because dark side Scorpio is like poison on steroids. It is cunning and manipulative, vengeful and venomous, and worst of all, it will sting you in such a quiet, covert way you won't even know when or how it happened. Ancient Greek mythology associates the constellation of Scorpio with the death of the hunter Orion. I actually found a couple of variations on this story, and both of them are incredibly interesting. In the first one, it is said that Orion and Artemis were hunting partners. This caused Artemis' brother, Apollo, to become incredibly jealous of their friendship. As a result, he called on Mother Earth to create a giant scorpion that would sting Orion, poisoning him to death. Eventually, Zeus put both Orion and the giant scorpion among the stars, thus creating the constellation of Scorpio. In another tale, Orion had boasted to Artemis about how he would hunt and kill every creature on Earth just to prove that no one and nothing is infallible to him. Enraged, Artemis told her mother Leto, and together they sent a scorpion to sting and kill Orion. Zeus then put both Orion and the scorpion among the stars as the constellation of Scorpio to serve as a lesson about pridefulness. In Egyptian mythology, the goddess of death and rebirth was called Selket, and her symbolic animal was the scorpion. She is often seen wearing the scorpion as a headdress and was known to have both the ability to cause death and also the ability to reverse it. Her name can be translated to both the opposite meanings, one being she who constricts the throat, and the other meaning being the one who opens up the throat to allow breath. So while that is a lot of lore, I mostly wanted this to be character-centric rather than based on mythology. So here we have Scorpio, the Vindictive. Like a skilled puppeteer, she manipulates the hearts and minds of men through her quiet, unassuming powers. She works in the shadows, injecting venom into entire civilizations in the name of vengeance and retribution. I didn't want this video to be super long, so I've cut out some bits of the speed paint, but if you are curious about the entire process from start to finish, you can find it over on my Patreon along with a bunch of super detailed tutorials and other exclusive videos. Link is in the description as well as in the cards above. But here is Scorpio the Vindictive. And there we have it, BEARBRICKJIA Demystified. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and if you have, then let me know by giving this video a big thumbs up and leaving a comment below. Hit that subscribe button and or join button if you'd like some exclusive tutorials, which is hours and hours of content. So if that's something you're interested in, then make sure you become a channel member. If there are any other artists you'd like to see on this series, then leave them in a comment below and I will look them up. And if you want to dive a little deeper into some more intensive, longer, much more detailed tutorials, consider joining my Patreon. The link is in the description, or become a channel member where you can get the same exact tutorials a little bit later than my patrons do. I'll also leave a playlist containing all of my style study videos up here. Make sure you watch them all. There is so much to learn from each and every one, and there is a reason that they are so popular on this channel. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!